Thank you for the opportunity to present at the 5G's Americas session this morning. I am Francola John, Stakeholder Engagement Specialist at the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, as well as the CTU's focal point for the International Telecommunications Union Network of Women. My presentation this morning is on advancing gender equality in the Caribbean, integrating parity and mainstreaming into our national ICT agenda. About the CTU. The CTU has been in existence for 34 years. We celebrated our 34th anniversary this year, and we're a CARICOM organization. Our core activities are ICT harmonized policy formulation, capacity development, regional ICT project coordination, Caribbean representation, and industry watch. So we are a facilitation body really representing 20 member states, as you would see on the screen. Our 20 member states with 14 CARICOM countries, and the other members are overseas territories. We are also representing non-state members comprising of private sector organizations, regulatory bodies, and civil society. So our membership consists of those groups of persons. Let's start off on what the topic is about. And really, when we want to address equity, parity, mainstreaming, and equality in gender, we have to give some definition. So equity refers to the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, taking into account individual needs, backgrounds, and circumstances. So it is a process of being fair to both men and women. So it ensures that fairness, strategies, and measures must often be available to compensate for the historical social disadvantages that most women encounter, and men, from otherwise operating on a level playing field. When we look at parity, parity typically refers to the state of being equal, especially in terms of status or value. In many contexts, it means ensuring the same number, value, and amount of different groups. This term often arises in discussions about gender parity. You have wage parity and somewhat, equal pay for the same job or work. When you look at equality, according to the United Nations, it defines gender equality as the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of all individuals, regardless of their gender. So when we even focus on gender issues, you recognize it's not just about women, but we are also looking at equality, parity, and mainstreaming when it comes to men as well. We are also taking into consideration the imbalance in connectivity. Now, keeping in alignment with the theme of the session, connectivity, we want to focus on really the gender imbalance. So we have looked at reports such as these that reveal problems with equity, equality, and parity. And I invite you to take a look at these reports. When you get the presentation, you can really analyze all of these reports and identify where these problems are. So we looked at the World Economic Forum Gender Gap, the International Telecommunications Global Digital Regulatory Outlook, and you would observe that most of these reports are recent reports, as recent as this year, 2023. We look at the EU, the Americas, and the Caribbean Regional Multi-Annual Indicative Program for 2021 to 2027. The OECD brought out a publication on Latin America and the Caribbean Social Institutions and Gender Index. That report came out in 2023. And the UNDP, in collaboration with Equals Global Partnership Gender Gap in digital skills came out in 2019. Gender imbalances, including those in the ICT sector, are influenced by various factors. The Caribbean, of course, we have our own challenges and opportunities when it comes to gender equity. There are several considerations around gender disparities in the Caribbean in relation to ICT. And I'd like to share some with you, some of the contributing factors. When we look at the imbalances or the considerations, the social, cultural norms and stereotypes, and we talk about this in every facet. So it may be perceived as predominantly male sector. The ICT sector may be perceived as one that is predominantly with male, is a male sector, discouraging women from participating or advancing. And recently we had a conference, Canto conference, which spoke about gender diversity in cybersecurity. And that issue of stereotyping came up as well, where the social and cultural norms would prevent or discourage women from getting in fields of STEM or engineering or anything ICT driven. Another factor, social and training. While women in many Caribbean countries have significant strides in education, and in some instances even outnumbering men, you would find that yet there's still some barriers that they face to entering some ICT focused related courses, such as, again, I mentioned cybersecurity, and you look at STEM and engineering. So this can be because of societal perception, lack of female role models, or limited access to resources. Economic factors. In some parts of the Caribbean, there is disparity when it comes to access and connectivity. Now, we understand that this is also a global problem, but when you look at it in the Caribbean, there is impact on both genders. Women being historically disadvantaged, economically may face bigger barriers. Workplace challenges in the ICT sector, like many others, can be influenced by gender biases. We fight balances or biases or face challenges in being taken seriously, getting promotion, or even receiving equal pay. They may also encounter lack of mentorship and networking opportunities. Another serious issue is safety and harassment. And when we talk about online spaces, it's not always safe for women. They may face higher rates of online harassment, cyberbullying, or cyberstalking, which can be a deterrent from participating or pursuing ICT-related opportunities. We look at policy and institutional barriers. Not all Caribbean countries have policies that actively promote gender equality in all sectors, including ICT. The lack of legislation and data that supports and promotes women in ICT can be a major hindrance. So again, the impacts of gender imbalance in our membership for our members. For the Caribbean region, gender imbalances, it impacts the economy, social equity, the human capital, and even performance in governance. So when we look at some of those issues, and which we will address later on, there is major impact and some of it which must be addressed. Let's talk about gender mainstreaming. Now, gender mainstreaming, according to Council of Europe, mainstreaming is a strategy for integrating specific concerns into policies, strategies, and operations. Gender mainstreaming means integrating a gender equality perspective into policies, programs, and projects at every level. And I would like to share with you that the CTU have taken a position to encourage our 20 member states to include mainstreaming for gender equality and parity into their national ICT agendas. I will share with you later where we would share our action plan and what we are hoping that the member states will work with us to ensure that they are part of the mainstreaming, of the gender policies. What's the benefit to them? As I said, we are urging them, we are working with them, but why would they do it? So gender mainstreaming requires the practice of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action. It is an integrative approach to achieving gender equality. It involves with the consideration, decisions, policies, and programs on both men and women to ensure that they benefit equally. So while we talk about it, it must be supported by policies and programs that would be enacted and enforced. It is a continuous process, so we're not only going to talk about it and talk about it once. We have to continuously work and facilitate that at the end of the day, it then is something that everyone feels equal. So it has to be part of the national ICT agenda. It's a commitment. When applied to the field of ICT, it ensures that there's equal opportunities to access resources, skills, and benefits. According to the Secretary General of the UN, it is a moral duty and an operational necessity. The meaningful inclusion of women in decision-making increases effectiveness and productivity. It brings new perspectives and solutions to the table. It unlocks greater resources and strengthens efforts across all of the 3 pillars of the UN's work. So it is a serious thing where we want to incorporate a Caribbean perspective. We want to have Caribbean participation, especially at the international fora, where women from the Caribbean have a greater input into the global policy making decisions. So when applied, it is where there is equal opportunities and access. So again, in moving forward, we spoke earlier on about challenges, but then we must also provide the solution. And therefore, in our research and in our findings, there's certain resources that can offer guidance when it comes to mainstreaming. And how can we help governments? How can we suggest ways in which they can incorporate mainstreaming into their national ICT agendas? So the ITU has a handbook on mainstreaming gender in digital policy. This came out in 2023. The OECD also has a toolkit for mainstreaming and implementing gender equality, another 2023 publication. The ITU, in its global regulatory outlook, produced a report. The UN ECLAC, Digital Inclusion in Digital Transformation Framework and Initiatives, also came out in 2023. And you'll also have the Buenos Aires Commitment. Now, when we look at these documents, they all give complete guidance, a framework, a step-by-step way of incorporating mainstreaming into national ICT agendas. What's the Caribbean actions? So there are several initiatives globally, but in the Caribbean, we specifically set out to address the gender imbalance, and such was outlined in the UNDP report of March 2023, towards an inclusive digital revolution in Latin America and the Caribbean, highlighting one of the projects. And let me just say, in our neighboring Barbados, there's a project improving inclusive digital resilience to foster local tourism. So this was launched. It's a 12-week business adaptation program, and it's aimed at 187 Caribbean SMEs, of which 77% are women-owned. So through this program, women are being trained in digital technology. Our role, as I mentioned earlier on, the CTU as a facilitation body, as one that fosters harmonized frameworks and policies, capacity building, Caribbean representation, and industry watch, it is important for us to start the process. So we did, and earlier on, we presented a proposal to our executive council, and that executive council adopted and accepted that proposal. And we will now, in October of 2023, take that to our General Conference of Ministers. So we're starting at a level where for it to happen, it can happen at that level. The resolution, it will urge member states to make a conscious and concerted effort to advance gender equality by integrating parity and gender mainstreaming into the national information and communication technology agendas. So we're not leaving them to do this on their own. We are partnering with them. We are working with them. We are offering guidelines. We are offering facilitation. So where we can do capacity building training, we will do such. Where we can, direct them as to where they can get information on that, we will also do so. But there's still so much more than we can do. We developed an action plan. So we also have an action plan for 2023 to 2024 to implement the recommendations outlined in that proposal. So one of the things that we want to focus on would be empowerment and capacity building, advocacy and policy influence, knowledge sharing and research, partnerships and collaboration, monitoring and evaluation. And in some of the ways we intend to do this, if I can go back to point one, capacity building, we have a number of international partners that we partner with, and most of them all have existing training programs that focuses on gender. We have worked with USDTI to send our members on training in terms of building a gender focus. We are partnering with GSMA. We are offering a building capacity for mobile with a gender focus. And over the coming months, we are going to continue to work, have a conscious effort and continue to work with our partners in terms of ensuring that capacity building in preparation for some of our international meetings, such as what is coming up at the end of this year, the World Radio Communications Conference happening in Dubai in 2023, we are focused on a lot of the capacity building to ensure that we build women in the region in preparation for that meeting. Advocacy and policy influence, and as I mentioned, meeting with our member states, meeting with the key government stakeholders is important to do that. We are partnering with other agencies in terms of disaggregate information on gender. So all of our events as well, when we do our events, we always have a way of capturing the data as to how many women are attending our events, how we are increasing those numbers, but not only for attendance, how many women we have on our Caribbean delegations and how many women we have on our panels. So it's important for us to have that overall data to see how we are improving our partnerships and collaborations. As I mentioned, being the focal point for the ITU's Network of Women means I work very closely with our representative here, who is on the Advisory Council of ITU, we partner and we collaborate with other UN agencies so that we can share resources in terms of what we can then transfer to our member states and our stakeholders in terms of that partnership and collaboration. And we want to monitor and evaluate because, as we mentioned, it is a continuous effort and it's a conscious one so that we can continue grow the growth and ensuring that we achieve our goals. The plan that we mentioned earlier on and the conferences I referred to are the International Telecommunications treaty-based events hosted annually. So global decisions are made at these conferences. The World Radio Communications Conference happening in Dubai in 2023. Then we have the World Telecommunications Standardization Assembly happening in 2024. One of the publications that I mentioned earlier on, the regulatory development publication, that would also look at the World Telecommunications Development Conference happening in 2025, and then the ITU's Plenipotentiary Conference happening in 2026. And one thing I must mention, at all of these events, the gender resolution and the Caribbean going through Latin America and Caribbean jointly with sending our proposals through CETEL, we then have that input into the events, which are all treaty-based and which we then have an input into the global decision-making. So this is really the outcome where we want that greater Caribbean participation to go forward. So we identify, yes, there are challenges globally, even in the Caribbean, even in the ICT sector. But our action and what we intend to do is really where our efforts and our thoughts are going into. So when you say call for action, the CTU, again, will act as a facilitator by building a community in the Caribbean region and enabling the following activities to be achieved. So the recommendations below really is in alignment with the ITU's handbook on mainstreaming gender in digital policies. So when we look at gathering data and conducting research, defining a gender mainstreaming practice to align the practice with national strategic documents, to identify focal points in key government institutions and consult with stakeholders, collaborate and partner with government institutions and stakeholders and measure impact. So these digital policies were outlined in that handbook. But when we talk about policy analysis and review, it's to, one, as we mentioned, of course, not all government agencies in the Caribbean would have it, but those who do and those who we need to further assist, we have to examine existing policies to identify and eliminate gender biases. We have to develop policies that address gender disparities. That comes at a cost. So then we look at ensuring that budgets are allocated in a way that promotes gender equality, recognizing that men and women might have different needs. Data collection and analysis. Collect gender disaggregated data to identify disparities and needs. Use this data to inform policies and programs. We're looking at gender impact assessment. Before implementing a new policy or program, it has to be assessed for its potential impact. So when we talk about action, we have to ensure that it's the right fit. We are doing the right thing. Stakeholder engagement. The CTU, as you would have recognized, have a strong stakeholder engagement unit, And we both engage our member states, our private sector members, our civil society, our partners, in order to ensure that their process and concerns are addressed. Gender focal points, part of our action plan, requires that we ask for a point of contact. So each of our member states, we're asking for that particular one point of contact where we can meet on a monthly basis, discuss what happens in that particular member state, and therefore that appointed gender expert or focal point within our member states can oversee and guide gender mainstreaming efforts within their ministry. Monitoring and evaluation. Regularly review and assess the effectiveness of gender mainstreaming. Adjust strategies as needed based on evaluation. So the evaluation process is also critical to us for continuous improvement. How do we improve on the policies? How do we improve on what we're implementing? Affirmative action. In areas where one gender is significantly underrepresented, affirmative action might be considered to ensure equal participation. So it's a concerted effort. It's a conscious one that we must ensure that everything that we're doing, there's that equity in the gender. Promote women in leadership. Encourage and support women to take up leadership roles. And in so doing, we find that we'd have that balance in terms of perspective, even in developing not only policies, but even technology type equipment that would ensure that access is available to all. Because sometimes when we talk about mainstreaming, it doesn't necessarily only mean in ICT, but it could also mean be part of disability, making sure that there's access for all, connectivity for all, the differently abled. So those are the areas that we really want to focus on in terms of doing that. Our proposal to our member states, as I mentioned, is to establish that point of contact, develop gender-responsive ICT agendas, develop multi-stakeholder partnerships, collect data, and encourage. The CTU, again, just as I may mention, when we look at STEM education and careers, it starts earlier in the education system. We have also appointed a focal point, a youth envoy focal point that will also focus on young women and the youth in getting them involved in STEM education. So yes, we have a focal point for women, but we also have a youth envoy that will take care of those. Another resource that we have launched, while the Caribbean has a staggering record of potent women leaders in telecommunications, women are a key CTU stakeholder group. So we have engaged them through our recently launched monthly publication called In the Know, just to share updates, inform on activities, data, announcements, and successes of women in ICT in our member states and the wider Caribbean community. The vision of the CTU's network of women is to lead in the charge in creating a strong community to drive ICT and have impactful transformation across the Caribbean. We envision women being equally represented and actively shaping the industry's future. And we want to invite persons to join with us. If you want to be in the know, you can send us an email, you can communicate with us, send in your articles, share your information with us, and let us work as one Caribbean that's really making an impact towards transformation, digital transformation in the region. That is the end of my presentation. I am, again, Francola John, Stakeholder Engagement Specialist, but also the focal point for ITU's Network of Women. I do hope that you would take the opportunity to review the reports that I've outlined in the presentation that would help your organization, help our member states to really incorporate and achieve the goals of gender mainstreaming in the Caribbean. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.